Hi friends, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie and today we are going to be revisiting ILNP's Manhattan collection from fall 2021. So if you're familiar with me or my channel, you know that I love ILNP, and over the past year or so I've been reviewing a couple of their older collections because I feel like they just still deserve so much love. I've had my eyes on the Manhattan collection for a while, which are described as these rustic, jewel-toned ultra holos that feature both a linear and a scattered holo effect. So I'm really excited to show you these. I will save more of my thoughts for the end after comparisons. For now, let's just get into the swatches. The first polish we have is Skyline, and this one is described as a midnight sapphire blue, which I would say is pretty accurate. It's definitely a dark but still bright shade of blue at the same time. I almost want to say there's a little bit of like a teal undertone, but maybe it's hard to tell. Either way, it's a stunning color, and this one had a really fantastic formula where I got such great coverage on the first coat alone. It was very pigmented, very even coverage, not quite a one coater, but almost there. Maybe if your nails were shorter, but I still would recommend doing two. The next shade we have is Broadway, and this one is described as a saturated wine red ultra holo. No surprise, this was one of my top favorites from this collection. I just love these deep berry wine red kind of shades. This one was just so gorgeous, and it had another super flawless formula. Again, very pigmented, very even on the first coat, so it was very impressive, but I still don't think I would call it a one coater. Maybe if you went in a little bit thicker, and again, if your nails were shorter, but I would just recommend doing a second coat just because it deepens up the color a little bit more to match what's in the bottle. I generally think the whole collection are solid two coaters unless your nails are longer than mine. Then we have Uptown, which is described as a warm and lively burnt orange. And you probably saw this in my fall favorites video, but I was saying in that video, this one doesn't lean burnt orange compared to the other burnt oranges that I shared. This definitely has a little bit more of this golden wheat kind of color. But when you are looking at it on its own, it does lean a little bit more orange than yellow. Either way, it is just so gorgeous. Apologies, I forgot to include the application of the second coat, but this is what it looks like. I would say it's nearly full coverage. This is the only one that might need a third coat. Up next we have Park Ave, and this one is described as a deep jade green, which I thought was interesting because this shade of green does not read jade to me. I almost want to call this an emerald where there's a little bit of a teal undertone, but again, either way, however you decide to describe it, this is another absolute beauty. I would say this one has a more similar formula to the first couple of shades in the collection where it was just a lot more pigmented, more full coverage, and easily opaque in two coats. I think this is a beautiful shade of green, but I'm still unsure about how I like it on me. Maybe it's more fitting for like the winter season. The next shade we have is Brownstone, and this one is described as a luminous, warm brown. I would say this is another favorite from this collection. I just love warm-toned browns so much, especially for this time of year. I think the color is just so incredibly flattering. Formula-wise, this one had a very similar formula to the others, but I would say that this one was a little bit more on the sheer side, almost similar to Uptown, but I think this one built up to be more full coverage after the second coat. So again, I don't think you would need a third for this shade, but it depends on your nail length and application. And even though this one has that same ultra holo finish, for some reason I feel like the holo was turned up in this polish. Maybe because the base was a little bit more sheer. And rounding out the collection, we have Penthouse, and this one is described as a regal dark purple Ultra Holo. I was so surprised by that description because I just could have sworn this was a super dark charcoal sort of shade. It's not dark enough that it's a true black holo, as you'll see in the comparisons, and you can see some warmth to it, but I just wouldn't consider it purple. I feel like it's so hard for me to see the purple, so I'm definitely curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this shade. I still really like it for just being like a dark, non-black holo. I think it still works for the collection. It still had a great formula, but yeah, definitely intrigued by this one. And here is the Manhattan collection worn as a skittle. I'm wearing 2 coats of each with top coat in direct sunlight so you can see that glorious holo sparkle. And I'm wearing both Broadway and Brownstone on my thumb, and hopefully you can see what I mean when I mentioned Brownstone's holo just popping so much more. So gorgeous. I just could not stop staring at these. I also am showing these in more lower lighting and admittedly not as exciting. Obviously you're not going to see any of that holo sparkle because that's really just going to show up in the direct sunlight or under flash, but I still think you can tell that these are sparkly. Now moving on to comparisons, we're starting with Skyline, and I had to see this next to ILNP's You Up because it's kind of the only other dark blue holographic that I have, but this one is one of their scattered jelly kind of formulas, so even though they might look kind of similar in the bottle, as you can see on the nail, they definitely have a very different effect due to Skyline's linear holo pigment, but it's a little lighter too. Then for Broadway, I had to show this next to Honeymoon from the very recent Vineyard collection. Similar to You Up, Honeymoon has that scattered jelly flaky kind of formula, so it's going to have an overall different finish than the traditional Ultra Holo line. Color-wise, they're definitely pretty similar, but I would say that Broadway is a little bit less berry and more of like that wine red. The only dark linear that I have from Holo Taco is Dead Petals, and at first I thought that these were going to be pretty similar, but Dead Petals is actually a bit deeper and more on the purple leaning side. Not to mention it's only a linear holographic, it doesn't have the added scattered holo flaky, so in my opinion the holo just doesn't really shine the way it does in ILNP. Then for Uptown, I wanted to quickly show this next to Holo Taco's Sunshine Crush from the Rock Candy collection because that one's like a true warm golden kind of shade. You can see that Uptown does lean a lot more orange. And here are a few other quick bottle comparisons to some other ILNP shades, starting with Hidden Path from the recent Vineyard collection. That one was described as a mahogany, but I very much consider it an orange. It's still too dark to match Uptown. And here it is next to Hayride from the Harvest collection, which is supposed to be like a very warm gold shade. You can see the gold flakies really pop, but the base is more of a true orange. It's a little bit darker and warmer than Uptown. I also have a bottle comparison for Holo Taco's Zyler Cat Eye, which I thought kind of had a similar sort of color, but it's a magnetic, so it's a totally different finish. And here it is next to Mooncat's Fake Halo, which is a linear holo, so it's similar in that aspect, but that one is more of a pale champagne gold. I actually thought that the closest shade was ILNP's Fawn, which is kind of described as like a coppery sort of brown. It is a magnetic though, so the brown base is kind of hidden underneath all of that copper shimmer. So I thought maybe if I layered a scattered holo on top of that, it would kind of mimic the effect, and I feel like it sort of does. I think you can see that it has a darker base, but it's very much giving we have Uptown at home. Then for Park Ave, I wanted to show this next to Holo Taco's Ivy League from the recent Dark Academia collection. That one isn't a holo, it's just a green shimmer and a lot darker too, but it was kind of the closest shade that I had. Then for Brownstone, I was kind of immediately reminded of Bloodline, which I also just shared in my fall favorites video, but then I was like, wait, that's actually kind of similar to Broadway, and then I realized Bloodline is sort of the in-between of these shades, but I think it does lean a little bit more similar to Brownstone. It just obviously isn't as brown, it's a lot more warm and berry leaning, but not as dark as Broadway. So do you need all three of these? Probably not, but don't ask me to choose favorites. I also have to show Brownstone next to a typical brown holo. The only one that I have in my collection is Mooncat's Boa Constrictor, which is only a linear holo, and at first glance it looks like it could be a dupe, but once you see them on the nail, you can see how much more of a true brown Boa Constrictor is. It's not as reddy as Brownstone, where I would consider that one a brick. Lastly, for Penthouse, because I was so convinced it was like a charcoal gray, I wanted to show it next to Moondust, which is this charcoal gray shimmer multi-chrome from the Cosmos collection. Totally different finish, but I just thought color-wise it might be similar. And of course, for reference, I also had to include Mooncat's Cruel Mirage, which is just a black linear holo. So seeing these on the nail, you can definitely tell them apart. And I guess seeing Penthouse next to a true black and charcoal, you can kind of see that this is a purple, but I don't know, it's still a stretch in my book. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for ILNP's Manhattan collection. As always, I can't wait to hear what you think of this release, especially if you remember when it was first released or if you have these in your collection. No surprise, I think these are fantastic. I feel like it's just rare when I'm not impressed with an ILNP collection or formula, but I could see how these might not be the most unique, especially if you do have a lot of like linear holos in your collection already. If you watched my favorite holographics video from a couple of months ago, you might remember that I am more team scattered holo over linear, so I don't have that many linear holos. So again, I'm sorry that I didn't have a lot of comparisons for these, especially with Holo Taco's Dark Rainbow collection. I feel like that's probably the closest color-wise to this lineup, but I still wouldn't call them dupes by any means. Maybe, if anything, Crimson Void is the most similar to Broadway, but Crimson Void is supposed to be more of a true deep blood red kind of shade, while Broadway is like a red leaning berry color. I think the rest of them are different enough that you could justify having both because they're just different colors and slightly different finishes too. You saw with my comparison to Dead Petals that that's just a linear holo, and I think because it's so much more opaque, the holo just kind of doesn't stand out as much, especially in indirect lighting or indoor lighting rather. So yeah, I can't just help but be a fan of this combination formula that has both linear and scattered because I just find it to be extra sparkly and I love that. Anyway, I do hope that you enjoyed this little revisit mini series that I've done. Like I mentioned in the intro, I have reviewed a couple of other older ILNP collections from a couple of years ago that I feel like still easily hold up now. ILNP has been around for a long time and they have an extensive catalog, so it's kind of easy to almost forget the things that have come out already. But the good news is that they are still around. So I was really fortunate enough to either get most of these gifted to me from ILNP directly or even from some friends of mine, or I just purchased them myself because they were collections that I have been really wanting for a long time. And I know that I have gotten some requests to continue sort of doing this, to swatch and review these older collections. And as much as I would still love to do that, this is probably going to be the last video for the next while at least, because like I've mentioned in so many other videos, I'm kind of at capacity with having 4 Helmers and I just have to be really mindful about what I'm bringing into my collection. As I'm sure so many of you know, I already receive a ton of PR that I do share on my channel, and that alone takes up a lot of space pretty fast. So I just have to be extra mindful about what I'm actually buying and adding to my collection. And at this point, I just have so much polish that I don't get to enjoy them as often as I should probably. So I just don't want to keep buying collections or just keep getting a lot of collections that I'm not gonna end up using. I'm sure so many of you are gonna be understanding of that, but it still just like sucks because again, I would love to review a lot of ILNP's older collections because they have so many great ones. I am, however, still planning on doing a Black Friday haul from them, similar to last year or even just a couple of months ago. I placed an order during like the summertime where I just, you know, will build up my wish list for ILNP because again, they have just a beautiful catalog of shades, but these shades are all like assorted. They're from different collections over the years, and they're just basically polishes that I would rather have in my collection compared to buying these full collections, if that makes sense. So I hope that you'll be looking forward to that in the future. But yeah, make sure to let me know any and all thoughts that you have down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.